Chapter 5. Easy Jobs. The walk from Tammy's quarters to where Sandor lived wasn't exactly fast. The young woman who well, Jax had no idea what she did for a living, but it probably didn't pay all that well, given that she was in what many called the below. Smaller quarters, usually studios for folks that worked service industry jobs or dockside. While Wendy's was near the absolute lowest level of the station, the below was actually located just below the docks and the commercial sector, about as far from the high-class uppers as anyone could live. Sandor, on the other hand, kept his modest living space just above the docks and still well below the uppers. His office was above the docks as well, but within the toroid docking facility. He stopped at a small kiosk and got a venti black coffee. When your company wins the coffee shop wars, you get to name the drinks and sizes how you like, Jax guessed. He poured a sizable amount of sugar into it, then left, merging into the morning rush of pedestrian traffic heading to work. Sandor must be working the night shift if he was in his office instead of work. After high school, the man had gone to trade school, then got a job in the traffic management office. He'd moved up the ranks a few times in the last few years. Jax remembered how goofy his old friend was in school, but he turned into quite the stable citizen now. His family weren't station founders, but had been on Kelso at least a generation, his parents having arrived with the first wave of technical workers after the station spun up. His wife and son loved Jax like family. Ebo called him Kua Jack. Sandor's office was really a storage closet he had hacked the station computer into forgetting about. It had a small desk, a single chair for guests, and a series of wires hanging from an open-access panel. A computer terminal was spliced into a few of the data lines. Rudy had helped him set it up a bunch of years back. Rudy was parked outside the door to the closet, his flat head turned as Jax approached. "Hi." "He in there?" Jax said as he arrived, patting his mechanical friend on the head only to be swatted away. "He's expecting us," Rudy said, then turned and pressed the button set next to the door. The door slid aside after a moment, and Rudy went in first. Inside, the office was well lit. Sandor, his brown skin glowing from the single illumination strip in the ceiling, stood and motioned his longtime friend over. "Heard you got your ass kicked at darts last night." Jax looked down at Rudy, who made his shrugging gesture, and said, "Your failures don't need my help to spread around the station. I'm sure Sandor heard about it before you even left with Tammy." "I think it was Jessica," Jax said, waving his mechanical friend away. He heard Rudy mumble something about definitely Tammy. He turned to Sandor, taking his friend's hand. "Corey is back. She's hooked up with the bigger Delfino." He sighed and dropped into the single guest chair. "Good to see you, man." Sandor sat down. "Good to see you too, amigo. I heard that job you picked up went well." He turned slightly to look past Jax to Rudy. "Thought we had an arrangement, Abokina." Rudy made his wheel sticky so he could lean sideways. He made his shrugging gesture and said, "Sorry, Sandor. That guy called the ship directly." The brown-skinned, half-Hispanic, half-Nigerian man waved his hand. "No big." He turned to Jax. "Glad it went well. Heard you had to give most of it to the Delfinos." He chuckled. "Guess dating one doesn't get you a discount." He grinned as Jax flushed deep red. Jax shrugged. "Well, enough. Got the folks we were supposed to get home. Had to ditch an Imperial patrol on the way back here. Those assholes are getting more and more pushy out here." He leveled a finger at his friend. "And who I do or do not date is not up for discussion." "That will make Tammy happy," Rudy quipped. After stifling a laugh, Sandor nodded. "I figured that was you. A notice came in the other day about a Valerian infiltrator that evaded a routine boarding action." He winked. "The notice found its way into the trash." He leaned forward. "So, I've got an interesting opportunity for you." Family. Sandor explained the job and the client, and when Jax didn't say, "not interested," arranged a meeting. The client was on station. Part of the job would entail getting him back home. Jax wasn't thrilled about more passengers, especially so soon after having to deal with the relief workers from Mariposa. Sandor confirmed it was just the one man, and it was on the way, which made Jax acquiesce. The meeting was set for the next morning, breakfast at The View. As he and Rudy were waiting for a lift in the station's central shaft, his G-phone started singing. He glanced down at the screen. Auntie. He looked over to Rudy, holding the phone so the small droid could see the screen. The nav droid made a noise and rolled to another lift bank, pressing the up button. Jax frowned and joined him there as he tapped his earpiece. Auntie, how are you? Governor Niti Singh didn't sound overly happy. Jackson, what have you been up to? The lift arrived, and he and Rudy entered. The lift started up towards the administrative levels. Jax ran his fingers through his light brown hair. What do you mean, Auntie? I've been off station. I know that, she growled. Even after all the years she had spent on Kelso, her thick Indian accent from her birthplace on Earth hadn't thinned in the slightest. I'm the governor. I know which ships are docked and which aren't. Jax felt himself slipping back into old habits. Yes, Auntie. Don't yes, Auntie me. I expect to see you in my office in 10 minutes, the old Indian woman demanded. She closed the channel before Jax could reply with another yes, Auntie, which surely would have landed him in more hot water. He looked down at Rudy. She's mad. The droid made a strangled-sounding noise. The lift doors slid open, and Jax jogged most of the way from the lift bay to the government offices. He made it to the lobby of the governor's office with 7 minutes to spare. Hi, Jeffrey. He nodded to the admin sitting outside the double doors to the back office. She's expecting me. The well-dressed younger man smiled. She is indeed. You brought your combat armor, right? He looked to Rudy. Hi, Rudy. You may want to wait out here. That bad? Jax asked as he pushed the announcer button next to the doors. The other man nodded once as the double doors slid apart. Jax was pretty sure he heard the man whisper, Godspeed. What in the name of all that's holy are you doing out there? The diminutive Indian woman growled from behind her desk. She stood up, her bright yellow and purple sari unfolding around her as she came around her desk. Do you think I don't know what goes on outside this station? Jax looked around the office, studiously avoiding eye contact, until, with a flash of purple and yellow, the brown-skinned woman was right in front of him, jabbing a bone-thin finger into his chest. You've been running contraband. Auntie, look. She turned, hand waving dismissively. Don't, Auntie, look me. She paced back to her desk and picked up a data tablet. Do you know what this is? Data tablet? Jax offered, knowing immediately it was a bad idea, when the small, angry woman took a step toward him, hand raised. He raised both hands. Auntie, calm down. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Jackson, your grandmother was a dear friend of mine. I watched your father grow up and loved your mother like a daughter. She turned her sad eyes on him. This isn't what I'd want for you. She shook the tablet. Do you think I don't get Imperial bulletins? As much as it disgusts me, this station is only independent so long as the Empire doesn't care to annex us. Jax walked over to one of the guest chairs opposite the desk and dropped into it. Auntie, what would you have me do? They left me an infiltrator, not a cargo ship. There's only so many types of jobs I can do. The war is over. They lost. Keep a lower profile. Like you said, the Osprey is an infiltrator, so infiltrate. Don't be caught or seen. She tapped the tablet. This one specifically calls out a Valerian co-op infiltrator that ran from an Imperial patrol. She raised an eyebrow. Fair point. He snapped his fingers. Oh, but hey, I can't tell you specifics, but I got a gig. One that's doing good work. Legitimate work, I think. He held up a hand. It doesn't even involve the Empire. The small woman moved to sit behind the desk. Oh? Jax nodded. I meet with the client tomorrow. It's a good gig, helping people. I think. I don't know yet, but that's the impression I got. She nodded slowly. That's good. She looked him in the eye. You know, I only want the best for you, right? Jax nodded. Then get out of my office. I'm a busy woman. Jax got up as she brought up a report of some type on her terminal. Meet the client. The View restaurant occupied the highest non-command level of Kelso Station. It was 3 levels below Auntie Singh's offices. Wraparound transparent steel windows provided a 360-degree view of local space. Diners could watch ships come and go, wormholes creating light shows across the ceiling of the high-end restaurant. Depending on their table, some could stare at the neighboring nebula. Jax walked in and nodded to the maitre d'. Hi, I'm meeting someone here. The man who looked like he'd been born a maitre d' raised an eyebrow. Name? Ichiko, Jax offered. Sandor had told him he'd be meeting a Nathan Ichiko, and scant little else. The snooty host extended a hand. This way, Mr. Ichiko calmed ahead. He will be here in 10 minutes. He escorted Jax to a table set for 2. When Jax sat down, the well-dressed host said, Sonia will be your server. He didn't offer more, turning to walk away. Jax tapped his earpiece. How's the shopping going? Baxter answered. It's going. I'm down in the market. Rudy went up to the nicer shops. I've got some engine components and other stuff from Skip's list. Rudy chimed in. Up top picking up groceries and other stuff. Jax nodded, noticing someone he assumed was the potential client. Okay, I'll check in when breakfast is over. Enjoy the view, Baxter said. Jax stood as a middle-aged man of Japanese descent arrived at the table. Mr. Ichiko? He extended his hand. The other man took the offered hand. Jackson Caruso, smuggler. He released Jax's hand and motioned for the younger man to sit. Please. The 2 men sat. A woman, Sonia, Jax assumed, came over. Good morning, gentlemen. Coffee? Jax and Ichiko both nodded. Once Sonia poured the coffee, took their orders, and withdrew, Jax turned his attention to the man opposite him. Round, happy face, wearing a suit that Jax was certain didn't come from a vendor on Kelso Station. So, what can I do for you, Mr. Ichiko? Jax took a sip of his coffee. He could tell it was the good stuff, not vat-grown. The aroma of the brew was the best telltale. Ichiko put his coffee down. I need your help, or rather, a small group of miners I work with do. The group I represent is based on Jebediah. Small mom-and-pop operations, mostly. We've been the target of harassment from one of the larger mining concerns. They're trying to squeeze some of the co-op members out of their claims, aggressively, often violently. Sonia returned with 2 plates, each loaded with bacon and eggs, both the real deal. Jax nodded to her as she departed. I don't do security, at least not long-term. Why not get the Imperials involved? He raised an eyebrow. And, no offense, but judging by your suit and this meal, your co-op can afford a lot better than me. Ichiko sliced up some eggs, taking a bite. As he chewed, he smiled. After swallowing, he said, We can, yes, which is why they want our claims. You probably don't want to hear this, but your reputation precedes you. And no, we don't want long-term security, especially from the Imperials. Every quarter there's a train from the stockyard to the spaceport. Unfortunately, the concern in question has been raiding our stockpiles and filling their warehouses. He paused to take a sip of coffee, then continued. We need your help to raid the shipment. If we can take back what's ours, plus what they've collected, we'll be set up to hire a full-time security force. We also hope that a bloody nose is enough to send these bullies running. He took a sip of coffee. It's our hope that this is still at a stage where a scalpel, will be more effective than a dull machete. The Empire. He pulled a tablet out of the breast pocket of his suit jacket. This has the details, weights, sizes, dates, and such. He sliced up some more egg, taking a bite. He swallowed and added, While you think about it, tell me about your family. My understanding is that you're one of the founders of this station. Recruit a team. After breakfast, Jack stopped somewhere he was the exact opposite of enthusiastic to stop at. It had taken a little thinking to decide to take the job after he scrolled through the tablet and saw the offered payment. He finished breakfast and told Ichiko he'd take the job, but that he needed time to assemble a crew. The other man had agreed, and they'd set a departure time for the following evening. Jax assured him that'd be sufficient to do what he needed to do. A moment after he pressed the announcement button next to the door, it slid open. "Well, this is a surprise," Corey Lightning said, from the entry of Marshal Delfino's quarters. She'd changed her hair, the long braids replaced with 2 spherical afro puffs, one on each side of her head. Jax grimaced but kept the job in mind. "I need to talk to them." He looked past Corey. "Big dummy around? Yo, Marshmallow!" He moved left and right to look past Corey and her obstructive hair. She mirrored his movements as best she could to block him. Corey rested a hand on Jax's chest. "What do you want, Jax? Marshall and Stevie aren't here." "I've got a job. I need Steve and Marshall for it." Corey didn't hide her surprise. "Marshall? Steve? What for? What kind of job?" She shook her head. "I want in. I thought you hated them. I know they hate you. What makes you think they'd work with you?" Jax shook his head. "What is this, 20 questions? How long are you even here for? Why would I want to split the payout even more?" He tried to remember the rest of her questions. "And yeah, we're not besties, but they're professionals. I'm a professional." He grinned. "Credits are credits." "I'm leaving in 2 weeks. My boss will need me back on Jericho Station then. Until then, if you're taking the Delfinos, you're taking me." He turned slightly and exhaled. "We'll be done by then." He turned back to the ebony-skinned woman. "Come on, let's go find your new boyfriend. You and he can work out the money." She smirked. "He's not my boyfriend, new or otherwise." She left the room and let the door slide shut behind her. "You can't still be mad about us breaking up. My understanding is that you and Stevie—" Jax held up his index finger, then spun and stalked towards the lifts that ran up and down the center of the kilometer-long, cigar-shaped station. Jax said, "Where are we heading?" He pressed the call button nearest him. When the lift doors slipped apart, the two entered. Corey said, "Private mech base topside. They're visiting someone that Marshall said owed them some money." She looked away, unable to meet Jax's gaze, knowing what that meant. Jax nodded. "Better give Loverboy a call, let him know we're coming." "Stop being a child," she replied, removing a G-phone out of her pocket. By the time the lift stopped at the upper level of the thick donut-shaped section of the station where ships docked, Marshall and Steve Delfino were waiting for them in one of the small conversation nooks that dotted the main walkways of the station. Corey walked up and planted a kiss on Marshall's cheek before sitting next to him. Jax glanced at Steve, his face reddening slightly. "Hey," Steve said nothing. Marshall and Corey looked at the two uncomfortable men, then at each other. Marshall cleared his throat. "Corey says you have a job you want us in on? What in the name of the Emperor makes you think we'd work with you?" Jax sat down opposite them. He looked at Steve, then the couple. "Actually, just you two." He pointed to the Delfinos. "She insists on tagging along." Corey said nothing, flipping Jax off. Marshall leaned forward. "What's the job?" He casually placed a hand on Corey's thigh, his eyes never breaking contact with Jax's. Before Jax could open his mouth, Corey very deliberately lifted Marshall's hand off her leg. She looked at Jax, one eyebrow quirked. "The job?" Jax took that as his cue. "I need to boost a train car, or 2 of raw ore, out on Jebediah. Gotta get the schedule, the transit details, and get it done." He spread his arms. "Bigger job than me and the boys can do on our own." Steve snorted. "The boys? Your droids, you mean?" Jax snapped his head around. "At least they don't lie or use people." Steve leapt to his feet. "God damn it, I didn't lie to you." He glared at Jax, then his brother and Corey. "Whatever." He stormed toward the bank of lifts, slamming an open palm to the controls. When no lifts arrived immediately, he stomped to the wall to lean against it. Marshall leaned over to Corey. "They have recent history." Corey rolled her eyes. "I know that." She turned to Jax. "So why us?" She saw the look on his face. "Why them?" Jax composed himself. Marshall is, well, he gestured to the heavily muscled Delfino brother. Marshall? He looked over to where Steve was leaning against the wall. Stevie is an engineering whiz? We'll have to rig something up to get those cars. The Osprey should have the power, but she's not a cargo lifter. He paused, then said, well, you're smart. I'm sure we can find a use for you, so long as Marshall pays you out of his cut. I sometimes wonder what didn't work out with us. Corey's brown eyes looked as fierce as ever. Today isn't one of those days. Marshall chuckled. Burn! He turned to Jax. We're out. We've got to run to Shin Nihon. Can't wait. Full hold of grapefruit. They spoil. Jax pulled his G-phone out of his jacket pocket and swiped up on the screen. Marshall and Corey's devices both beeped at the same time. She had hers out first. Holy shit. Jax nodded. Yeah. Marshall snapped his fingers to get his pouting younger brother's attention. When Steve got closer, he said, You two need to figure your shit out. I'll make the Shin Nihon run. You go with him. He pointed to Jax. And Corey. Marsh, the younger Delfino started, but stopped when his much larger brother held up a hand. Steve may have been the smarter of the two, but Marshall was in charge. Corey looked at Steve. It'll be fun. We can share stories about his shortcomings. Jax rubbed his face. I have a bad feeling about this.